My name is Lauren, and I'm 22 years old. Ever since I was a kid, I wanted to be independent to carve my own path, free from anyone else's influence. So when I got accepted into college on a full scholarship, it felt like my hard work was finally paying off. My tuition was covered, but I still needed a place to live. That's when my mom proposed what seemed like the perfect solution. "I've been thinking," she said one evening while we sat in the kitchen. "You know the apartment your grandmother left me? Why don't you rent it? I'll even give you a good deal way cheaper than anything else in the area." I did some research, and she wasn't lying. The rent she was asking was almost half of what similar places were going for. It seemed like a no-brainer, even though I knew I'd need a job to cover it. "You'll need to sign a lease," Mom added, sliding a stack of papers across the table. I always do things by the book. I didn't question it. Why would I? She was my mother. So, I signed the lease and, within a week, landed a job at a local cafe near campus. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid the bills. My routine was exhausting but manageable. Wake up, go to class, work my shift, come home, study until my eyes burned, then do it all over again. It was tough, but I felt proud of myself. I was making it work until everything changed on a Thursday evening. I had just finished a brutal shift at the cafe. All I wanted was to collapse on my couch and let my brain turn to mush for an hour before tackling my assignments. But as I opened the apartment door, I froze. There, sprawled across my couch like she owned the place, was my sister Madison. Two oversized suitcases sat beside her, and she was lazily scrolling through her phone as if she had all the time in the world. "What are you doing here?" I asked, still standing in the doorway. She barely glanced up. "Oh, hey, I'm moving in." Mom said it was fine. I felt my stomach drop. "Moving in? Are you paying rent?" Madison snorted, finally looking at me. "Of course not. Why would I?" My hands shook as I called Mom, demanding an explanation. "Are you serious, Lauren?" she snapped. "What kind of selfish question is that? Of course, Madison isn't paying rent. You're already covering everything. Nothing's changing. Mom, she's another person using water, electricity, space. That apartment is mine, and I decide how things work. If you don't like it, you can move out." I felt sick. I checked rental listings, but everything in my budget was a shoebox, miles away from campus. So, I swallowed my pride and let it go. That was my first mistake. Living with Madison was a nightmare. She had zero concept of personal space. She left every light in the apartment blazing, dumped her stuff everywhere, and treated my schedule like it didn't matter. She'd lock herself in the bathroom for hours, taking endless baths while giggling on the phone with her friends. The sound of running water became my new background noise. "Madison," I said one morning, trying to keep my voice calm, "can you turn off the lights when you leave a room? The electricity bill? Ugh, you're so uptight," she groaned, not even looking up. "It's not that big a deal." "Not that big a deal?" The first utility bill after she moved in was double what I usually paid. I stared at the number, my stomach twisting. That night, I confronted her. She was sprawled on the couch, feet up on the coffee table, watching videos at full volume. "We need to talk about the bills," I said, holding up the paper. "They've doubled. You need to be more careful." She finally looked up, smirking. "Or what?" I took a deep breath, my patience unraveling. "Or you need to find somewhere else to live." Her smirk vanished. "Excuse me?" "Mom said I can do whatever I want here." Something inside me snapped. "Pack your things. Get out." Her mouth dropped open. "This isn't your apartment." I met her glare. "I'm the one paying for it, and I say you're leaving." For a long moment, we stood there, neither of us backing down. Then she stomped off, throwing her things into her suitcases, cursing under her breath the whole time. She slammed drawers, knocked things over, and made sure I knew just how much she hated me. Finally, she dragged her suitcases to the door, turned to me one last time, and spat out, "You're gonna regret this." Then she stormed out, slamming the door so hard the windows rattled. I had barely caught my breath when my phone rang. Mom's name flashed on the screen. I knew what was coming, but my hand still shook as I answered. "What do you think you're doing?" she screeched. "Who do you think you are? Kicking your sister out." "Mom, she was. Shut up. You had no right." Pack your things and get out. Either you leave or I'm doubling your rent. Your choice. The rage I had been bottling up for weeks finally exploded. You know what? I'd rather pay 5 times as much somewhere else than deal with this insane situation. Before she could respond, I hung up. My vision blurred with anger as I stormed into my bedroom, yanking my suitcase from under the bed. I started throwing clothes into it, not even bothering to fold them. That's when it happened. As I reached for my bookshelf, I knocked over a stack of heavy books. They crashed to the floor, and something fluttered out from between the pages, a piece of paper. I bent down, ready to shove it aside, but then I saw the words at the top in bold letters. My grandmother's name was printed beneath it. My breath caught in my throat as I scanned the document. Then my stomach turned to stone. My grandmother had left this apartment to me. Not to Mom, not to Madison, to me. And I had been paying rent on it for 2 years. I sank to the floor, the paper clutched in my trembling hands. My mother's voice from years ago echoed in my mind. Mom left everything to me. All the property, all the money. It was her decision, and we need to respect it. I had believed her. I had been a fool. And now, I was going to make her pay. I sat there on the floor, gripping the will like it was the only thing keeping me from falling apart. My mind was racing, flipping through every moment of the last 2 years. Every rent payment, every lecture about responsibility, every time Mom made me feel like I owed her for the good deal she gave me. It had all been a lie. The worst part? They had known. They had to. Mom had this document in her hands at some point. She had read it, processed it, and then decided to screw me over anyway. And Madison? Maybe she hadn't known the legal details, but she sure as hell had no problem taking advantage of me. I swallowed hard and wiped my face. I wasn't about to cry over this. I was done crying over them. My phone vibrated next to me, another call from Mom. I let it ring. I wasn't ready to talk to her. Not yet. I needed to think. I grabbed my laptop and pulled up my bank statements. I scrolled back, my stomach twisting as I saw the rent payments leaving my account every month, like clockwork. Almost 2 years worth, thousands of dollars gone. And before I had moved in, someone else had been renting this place. Had Mom been pocketing that money too? I clenched my jaw. It didn't matter. What mattered was getting it back. By the time I finally picked up Mom's call, I was calm. Too calm. "Lauren," she started, her voice softer now, dripping with fake concern. "I know you're upset, but let's not overreact. Why don't we talk this through?" I let the silence stretch, forcing her to keep going. She sighed. "Look, since you found out, we can just put everything behind us, okay? The apartment is yours, and we'll forget about this whole misunderstanding." I almost laughed. A misunderstanding? Was that really the best she could come up with? "Mom," I said, my voice steady, "I want my money back." Silence. Then a sharp inhale. "You wouldn't do that to your own mother," she said, the warmth gone from her voice. "You did it to me first," she scoffed. "After everything we've done for you?" I gritted my teeth. "You mean the part where you tricked me into paying rent on my own property? Or the part where you tried to kick me out?" Her tone turned ice cold. "You ungrateful little," I hung up. I wasn't wasting another second listening to her excuses. Instead, I got to work. I spent the next 2 days gathering everything, every lease document, every bank statement, every message about rent. When I had everything printed and organized, I made an appointment with a lawyer. The office was quiet, filled with the smell of polished wood and fresh paper. Miss Roberts, the lawyer I met with, was a sharp-looking woman in her 40s who barely blinked as she read through the documents. When she finally looked up, her expression was unreadable. "This is pretty straightforward," she said. "Your grandmother left this apartment to you. Your mother had no legal right to collect rent from you or anyone else." I leaned forward. "So what can I do?" She tapped her pen against the desk. "You're entitled to compensation, not just for the rent you paid, but also for the years your mother was renting this place out before you moved in." I blinked. "Wait, so I can go after that money too?" She nodded. "Legally, yes. And depending on how much she charged previous tenants, you could be looking at a significant sum." My head spun. I had walked in expecting to get back what I paid, maybe a little extra if I was lucky. But this was bigger than I had imagined. Miss Roberts started calculating, breaking everything down month by month. She factored in my payments, the rent history, and even the market rates at the time. Finally, she slid a piece of paper across the desk. $62,000. I stared at it, my brain struggling to process the number. She leaned back. We can also pursue interest. Your mother has essentially been using an interest-free loan of your money for years. I exhaled sharply. No, just the rent money. That's enough. Miss Roberts nodded. I'll prepare the demand letter. She'll have 2 weeks to pay before we take legal action. 2 weeks. That was all the time Mom had before this turned into something much bigger. I walked out of that office with a strange mix of emotions. Relief, rage, a grim sense of satisfaction. This wasn't about revenge. It was about justice, about standing up for myself for once. That night, I sent Mom a simple message. We need to talk. Bring the property documents. Tomorrow. My place. Her response came faster than I expected. Fine. The next morning, I heard her key in the lock. She stepped inside, looking nervous, clutching a manila envelope. I brought the ownership papers, she said, forcing a smile. Everything's here to transfer the apartment to your name. I already had them prepared. How convenient. She spread the documents on the kitchen table, the same table where she had made me sign that ridiculous lease 2 years ago. Lauren, honey, she said softly, pushing the papers toward me. I know I made a mistake. A terrible mistake. And I'm asking for your forgiveness. Please don't be angry with me. We can put this behind us. I slid another document across the table. Her face fell. What's this? The demand letter from my lawyer. You have 2 weeks to pay me back. The second she finished reading it, her entire demeanor shifted. She shot up from her chair, nearly knocking it over. You ungrateful little, I held up a hand. Scream all you want. It won't change anything. You pay me back or I file a lawsuit. Your choice. Her face turned red, her hands shaking as she gripped the paper. You wouldn't dare, I tilted my head. Wouldn't I? She stormed out, slamming the door behind her. I could still hear her yelling as she stomped down the hallway. The phone calls started almost immediately. First from her, then from Dad, then Madison. Each one angrier than the last. I ignored them all. 2 weeks. That's all she had. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't the one who had to scramble to make things work. She was. And I was going to make sure she felt every second of it. The calls didn't stop. Mom, Dad, Madison. Each of them had something to say, and none of it was an apology. Mom tried guilt first. How could you do this to your own mother? Then she tried reasoning. Lauren, let's be smart about this. Dragging lawyers into family business? That's unnecessary. Then the anger. You are making a huge mistake. I blocked her number. Then Dad started in. He never called much before, but suddenly he had plenty to say. You're tearing this family apart. I thought we raised you better than this. And my personal favorite, you're going to regret this, Lauren. I blocked him too. That left Madison. And she wasn't about to sit this one out. She tried whining. If Mom and Dad have to pay you all that money, they won't be able to afford my college. You're literally ruining my future. I almost laughed. Maybe get a job, Madison. You know, like the rest of us. She called me a selfish bitch and hung up. That was the last time I heard from her. The next few days were eerily quiet. No more calls, no more attempts to manipulate me. I should have felt relieved, but something about it felt off. Too easy. Then, exactly 1 week into Mom's 2-week deadline, I got a text from an unknown number. We need more time. I stared at the message. Just 3 words, but they told me everything I needed to know. They had the money, or most of it, but they were scrambling. I could have replied, could have given them an extension. But why should I? When I was struggling, where was their sympathy? I ignored it. Then, on the morning of the deadline, I woke up to a deposit alert on my phone. $62,000. I blinked at the number, half expecting it to disappear, but there it was, every cent, sitting in my account. A few minutes later, another text. It's done. Don't contact us again. I exhaled. It was over. Or at least, I thought it was. 2 weeks passed before I heard from anyone again. Then Aunt Carol called. Carol had always been the family gossip, the one who knew everything about everyone. And this time, she had a lot to say. They had to take out a loan. she said, barely able to contain her excitement. A big one. Apparently, the bank almost didn't approve it because of their credit history. I sat back, listening as she laid it all out. Mom and Dad were drowning in debt. The payments on the loan were killing them. And Madison? She had to drop out of college. They couldn't afford it anymore. They're blaming you, of course, Carol added. You're the villain in this story. I didn't say anything. I didn't feel guilty. I didn't feel much of anything. They had done this to themselves. Carol sighed. I just thought you should know. After we hung up, I sat in silence for a long time. I should have felt satisfied, vindicated. But instead, I just felt tired. Life moved on. The apartment was finally mine, in every sense of the word. I redecorated, got rid of every trace of Madison's mess, and made the space feel like my own. The cafe where I worked promoted me to assistant manager. It wasn't a dream job, but it was enough. Enough to cover my expenses. Enough to let me start saving for the future. For the first time in years, I wasn't just surviving. I was building something. Every now and then, my phone would light up with an unknown number. I never answered. I didn't need to hear whatever excuses they had left. I had finally won, and for once, I wasn't looking back. It's strange how silence can feel louder than screaming. For years, my life had been filled with noise. Mom's constant nagging, Madison's whining, Dad's occasional lectures. But now, nothing. Just an empty inbox and a phone that barely rang. I thought I'd feel relieved, and in a way, I did. No more guilt trips. No more being used. No more living under their control. But sometimes, late at night, I caught myself expecting it. Waiting for another call, another attempt to manipulate me. It was like my brain hadn't caught up to the fact that they were gone. Not physically, of course. They were still out there, living their lives, stewing in their own bitterness. But they were gone from my life, and that was what mattered. One afternoon, I found myself scrolling through my banking app, looking at the numbers in my savings account. For the first time in my life, I wasn't constantly worried about money. The thought hit me like a punch. I don't owe them anything anymore. For so long, I had let them define my life. Even after I found out the truth, part of me had still been reacting to them fighting back, proving a point, making them pay. But what if I just stopped? 3 months after the money hit my account, I got a message from Dad. We should talk. I stared at the words for a long time. Part of me wanted to ignore it. The other part, the part that had spent years craving his approval, hesitated. Against my better judgment, I replied. About what? He didn't waste time. Come to the house. We can work this out. Work what out? There was nothing left to fix. I had what was mine. They had their debt. End of story. Still, curiosity got the better of me. Walking into my parents' house felt surreal. I hadn't been there in months, but everything looked the same except for them. Mom had lost weight. She looked exhausted, her face drawn, her usual perfect nails chipped. Dad was tense, sitting stiffly at the kitchen table. And Madison? She wouldn't even look at me. Mom was the first to speak. We want to fix this, Lauren. I raised an eyebrow. Fix what? She sighed dramatically. This distance, this mess you created. I almost laughed. I created the mess? Right. Because forcing your kid to pay rent on her own apartment was totally normal parenting. Dad cut in, his voice low. We were hoping you'd consider helping us with the loan payments. I blinked. Excuse me? Mom nodded, like this was the most reasonable thing in the world. Just until we get back on our feet. We're family, Lauren. We help each other. I stared at them, genuinely speechless. They stole from me, lied to me, took advantage of me for years. And now they wanted my help? A slow, cold rage bubbled up inside me. No, Madison scoffed. Wow, selfish much? I turned to her. You mean the way you lived in my apartment for free while I worked myself to exhaustion to pay rent? That kind of selfish? Her mouth snapped shut. Mom's voice sharpened. Lauren, we raised you. We fed you, clothed you, gave you everything. I cut her off. And then you stole from me. Lied to me. And now you want money? No. Dad's hands curled into fists. You don't have to be so. I don't have to be anything to you, I snapped. You made that clear when you saw me as a paycheck instead of a daughter. Mom's face turned red. So that's it? You're just walking away? Throwing your own family away over money? I exhaled slowly, letting the weight of her words sink in. It was never just about money, I said quietly. It was about trust. And you broke it. She opened her mouth, but I wasn't interested in hearing anything else. I turned on my heel and walked out the door for the last time. I didn't cry. I didn't feel guilty. I didn't even look back. That night, I sat in my apartment, and felt something I hadn't in years. Peace. I had spent so long fighting to prove myself to them, to earn their love, to be good enough. But I finally understood there was nothing to earn, nothing to fight for. I was free, and I was never going back. It's funny how life keeps moving forward, no matter how much you've been through. After cutting my parents off, I expected to feel something. Guilt, sadness, maybe even relief. But mostly, I just felt numb. It was like my brain hadn't fully processed that I was done with them. That I no longer had to brace myself for their calls, their demands, their manipulation. And yet a part of me still waited, like an old habit that refused to die. For weeks, I woke up expecting another message, another scheme, but they were gone, completely. No apologies. No last attempts. Just silence. Maybe they finally realized I wasn't coming back. With them out of my life, I had nothing holding me back. I threw myself into work at the cafe, and within a month, I was promoted to full manager. It wasn't my dream job, but it was steady. And for the first time, I was actually saving money. I decorated my apartment properly, new furniture, fresh paint, little details that made it feel like mine instead of a place I had been struggling to survive in. I even started reading again, something I hadn't had time for in years. For once, I wasn't constantly running on fumes, trying to stay ahead of disaster. I was living. But peace had a way of feeling unfamiliar. One night, I was sitting on my couch, watching some mindless show when my phone lit up. An unknown number. I stared at it for a long time. I should have ignored it, but I didn't. Hello? There was silence, then a soft sigh. It's Grandma's anniversary today. I froze. I hadn't heard that voice in months. Madison. She sounded different. Not the usual smug, entitled version of herself, just tired. I checked the date. She was right. It had been exactly 4 years since Grandma passed. I swallowed. Why are you calling? I don't know. Another pause, I guess. I thought you might want to talk. I almost laughed. After everything she'd done? But something about her voice made me hesitate. So I waited. It's been weird, you know? She said finally. The house feels different. Mom barely talks. Dad's always stressed. They act like it's business as usual, but it's not. They're struggling. I didn't respond. I thought cutting us off would make you happy, she continued. But you don't even seem happy, Lauren. I clenched my jaw. You have no idea what I feel. Madison sighed again. I guess not. A long silence stretched between us. Then, finally, she said, I miss you. I stared at the floor, my chest tight. Did I miss her? I wasn't sure, but I missed who we used to be before all of this. Before the lies, before the betrayal, before she became the kind of person who let our mother steal from me and still acted like I was the problem. I exhaled slowly. Take care of yourself, Madison. And then I hung up. I expected to feel torn up after that call, but instead, I just felt lighter. For so long, I had carried the weight of what they did to me. The anger, the betrayal, the injustice of it all. I had let it shape me, define me. But that call made me realize something. I wasn't angry anymore. I was just done. I wasn't waiting for an apology, an explanation, or even revenge. I had already won. I had my apartment, my savings, my life, and they had their debt, their broken relationships, their choices. That was enough. The next morning, I did something I hadn't done in years. I went to visit Grandma's grave. The cemetery was quiet, the early morning air crisp. I stood there for a long time, just staring at her name on the stone. I found out, Grandma, I murmured. I know you left the apartment to me. The wind rustled through the trees, carrying my words into the air. I know Mom lied. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of everything pressing down on me. But I handled it. And for the first time, I truly believed that. I wasn't the same girl who had signed that lease, who had worked herself to exhaustion trying to keep up with an unfair system. I had fought back, and I had won. As I turned to leave, I felt a strange sense of peace settle over me. Not because everything was perfect, not because I had all the answers, but because I finally understood. I wasn't running from my past anymore. I was walking away on my own terms. And that was the best revenge of all. For the first time in years, I wasn't waiting for the next disaster. No more scrambling to pay bills that weren't mine. No more bending over backward to please people who only saw me as a resource. Just quiet, steady progress, my life, my choices, my future. It felt strange at first, like wearing clothes that didn't quite fit. I had spent so long surviving that I didn't know what to do with peace. But slowly, I figured it out. I started with small things. Saturday mornings became mine again. I didn't wake up to Madison blasting music, didn't rush to pick up after someone else's mess. I made coffee in my own kitchen in a home that was finally fully mine. The extra money I used to hand over to Mom every month, I started saving it. At first, I didn't know what for. But after a while, the number in my bank account wasn't just survival money anymore. It was freedom. At work, I threw myself into the new manager role. It wasn't glamorous, but I liked it. For the first time, I wasn't just working to scrape by, I was actually getting ahead. And I was good at it. I hired new staff, reorganized the inventory system, even convinced the owner to start a customer loyalty program. The cafe ran smoother than ever, and people noticed. The best part? My paycheck reflected it. I wasn't rich, but I was stable, and that meant everything. One evening, as I wiped down the cafe counters before closing, the bell over the door jingled. I glanced up, ready to tell the customer we were closed, and then I froze. Madison stood there, shifting awkwardly, clutching the strap of her bag. For a second, we just stared at each other. Then she cleared her throat. "Hey," I exhaled, wiping my hands on a towel. "We're about to close." "I know," she hesitated. I was in the area." I raised an eyebrow. "She lived across town." She sighed. "Okay, fine. I wanted to see you." I crossed my arms, waiting. She let out a nervous laugh. "You're really not going to make this easy, huh? Depends on why you're here." Her expression shifted, less smug, more uncertain. "I got a job." That caught me off guard. "Yeah?" She nodded. "It's nothing special, just retail." "But it's mine." I studied her face, looking for the usual arrogance, the entitlement. I didn't see it. For the first time, Madison looked like someone who had been humbled. "Good," I said simply. She let out a breath, like she'd been holding it. "Mom and Dad aren't doing great," I shrugged. "Not my problem." Madison winced but nodded. "I know. She hesitated. "I'm not asking for anything. I just wanted to say, I get it now." I blinked. That I hadn't expected. She shifted her weight. "You were right about everything, about them, about how they used you." I stayed quiet, letting her speak. "I used to think you were just being dramatic," she admitted. "But when they lost your money and the loan payments started piling up, it was like they didn't know what to do without you. Like they didn't know how to function without someone to squeeze dry." I nodded slowly. "And when they ran out of options, they turned to you." She let out a bitter laugh. "Yep. And when I told them I wasn't their backup plan, they flipped out." I could picture it perfectly: Mom's outrage, Dad's disappointment, the guilt tripping, the tantrums. "How'd that go?" I asked. Madison smirked. "I packed my bags and left." I raised an eyebrow. "You left?" She nodded. "I'm staying with a friend, splitting rent, paying my own bills. It's weird, but it's better than being in that house." I studied her, trying to figure out if this was real, if she had actually changed. Madison had always been selfish, always taken the easy way out. But now she looked like someone who had finally learned what it felt like to stand on her own 2 feet. I leaned against the counter. "Why are you really here, Madison?" She took a deep breath. "I guess I wanted to say I'm sorry." I blinked. Not once in my entire life had Madison apologized for anything. She swallowed hard. "I was awful to you. I let Mom use you. I took advantage of you, and I never even thought about what it was doing to you." She hesitated. "I don't expect you to forgive me. I probably wouldn't if I were you. But I'm trying. I really am." I studied her carefully, looking for the lie, the manipulation. I didn't see it. I exhaled. "I'm not ready to forgive you." She nodded, like she expected that. "But I hope you stick with it," I added. "The job." paying your own way. If you actually do the work, maybe one day we'll figure things out. Madison's eyes flickered with something hope maybe. Yeah, I'd like that. I nodded toward the door. Go home, Madison. She gave me a small smile. See you around, Lauren. As she walked out, I let out a long breath. That night, I sat in my apartment, and let the last pieces of my past settle into place. Mom and Dad had made their choice. They had dug their grave, and I wasn't about to pull them out of it. But Madison? Maybe she had a chance. I wasn't holding my breath. But for the first time, I was willing to let time decide. I had spent years chasing their approval, bending over backward to earn love that was never freely given. I wasn't doing that anymore. I was building a life that had nothing to do with them, a life that was mine. And for the first time, that was enough. Story 2, I'm Ella, and I've been watching my husband, Mark, gradually deteriorate for the last 2 years. I recall thinking the floor had vanished under my feet when we were originally told we had stomach cancer. Mark was just 38 years old, had a wonderful profession in investment banking, and we had a lovely kid named Ethan, who was 9 years old. Decades were supposed to be ahead of us. The only bright spot in this horror was that we were able to pay for the best care possible because of Mark's financial success. We explored various medicines, traveled across the nation to see doctors, and spent every penny possible. However, as the months passed, it became evident that none of this treatment was providing a cure, only purchasing time. Mark's parents, Linda and Robert, were our pillars of support during it all. 20 minutes away, they took over without hesitation. When circumstances were difficult, Ethan will be picked up from school by Ella today. On days when Mark was supposed to receive treatment, Linda would say, also, don't bother about dinner. I've prepared more lasagna. When I put Ethan down at night, he would frequently tug on my sleeve. His eyes widened in dread and hope. When is Dad going to recover, Mom? I was at a loss for words. How do you break the news of a dying parent to a child? I simply brush his hair and tell him that the doctors are doing everything they can. My dear. The situation with my own parents, however, was different. My father, David, and mother, Karen, shared a home with Mark's parents. However, they may have easily been on a different planet. Could you come get Ethan from school today, Mom? Linda has a doctor's visit, and Mark is having a negative response to the chemotherapy. I'm very sorry, Ella, but we agreed to assist your sister in her search for an apartment today. It was always Jessica. You know how Jessica gets when she's anxious. All my life, it had been that way. Jessica had a cold when I was 7 years old, so my parents missed my school play. Even though Jessica was just in the ensemble, they departed immediately after the ceremony to see her dance recital when I graduated from high school. Over the years, I had become accustomed to it. His parents treated me more like a daughter than my own ever did, and Mark became a member of their family. I thus prepared myself for the inevitable last month when Mark's condition deteriorated. I was holding Mark's hand, surrounded by the family that had picked me the night he passed away. The hospice nurse had told me it wouldn't be long after his breathing had gotten weak, hours earlier. Ella, he said in a scarcely discernible whisper, look after Ethan. The strongest person I've ever met is you. His final words were those. After holding his hand while a group called, I sat there for hours. I can't comprehend that. My 12-year partner had left. Within an hour after my call, Linda and Robert were at the hospital. The same sadness that consumed me was engraved on their faces. Linda put her arms around me and murmured, "We're here, sweetheart. We'll be here forever." I texted my mother that evening. Tonight, Mark died. An hour later, she responded, "It's awful. No call, no invitation to visit." There was no doubt that Ethan and I were doing well. 2 words, but I didn't care since I was too numb. There was a boy to comfort, a funeral to organize, and a life to somehow reconstruct. Funeral preparations, paperwork, and attempting to inform Ethan that his father would not be returning home dominated the days after Mark's passing. Robert and Linda were present at every turn, taking care of funeral home calls when I was unable to speak and sitting with Ethan when he had inquiries that I was unable to respond to. I was overwhelmed with details the day before the funeral. The funeral home required final program decisions. I still had to pick up Ethan's outfit while distant relatives called for directions. I hadn't slept more than 2 hours at a stretch since Mark died. I need to ask my folks to watch Ethan. As we sat at my kitchen table, surrounded by cards of sorrow, I told Linda, "Robert and you are already accomplishing a great deal." I practiced my speech for when we got to my parents' place as I was driving Ethan there. With her purse already in hand, my mother, dressed in a light jacket, opened the door. "This isn't a good time, Ella," she stated without even extending an invitation to enter. "We're about to go. Please, Mom, only for a few of hours. We've been making preparations for weeks, and I have to make everything final for the funeral," my father interrupted, coming up behind my mom. "Right now, we can't cancel." Before I could continue to protest, after shutting the door behind them, they both went outdoors. My mother forcefully stated, "We really have to go. You can find someone else, I'm sure." Without even saying farewell to Ethan, who was standing there in confusion and pain, they rushed to their car. I contacted my friend Sarah after they left, and she agreed to watch him right away. Curiosity won over after I dropped Ethan off at Sarah's place. On my way home, I took a detour by my parents' house. Jessica's red Mazda was parked in the driveway, and the lights were on. With a sour laugh, I said to myself, "So that's the important plans. They had nothing to do. All they wanted was to support Jessica rather than me. Even today." I messaged our family WhatsApp group that evening. At 11 a.m., Mark will be buried. At Greenwood Chapel on Thursday, there will be a brief reception after the service. I saw my parents' and Jessica's names appear next to the read receipts. The night before the funeral, nobody responded. I called my mother instantly out of anxiety. "You did see my message concerning tomorrow's funeral, Mom? At 11 o'clock it begins." The line paused for a moment. "We're not going to be able to make it, Ella. I apologize." In honor of her promotion, Jessica has reserved many tables at Emilio's. We've already committed, and it's lunchtime. I almost dropped the phone. "This is Mark's funeral, Mom. We're referring about Mark, who covered the cost of fixing your home when the roof fell 3 years ago. Mark has been a member of our family for more than 10 years. Ella, that was a long time ago." My mom gave me a chilly response. "The living must be our priority, not the deceased. Right now, Jessica needs our help." She hung up before I could answer her. I called Jessica's phone right away. My hands trembled in shock and rage. "Hello," she responded, seeming irritated that I had disrupted her night. "Jessica, your celebration tomorrow coincides with Mark's funeral, according to Mom. Are you unable to reschedule? Or at least reschedule it to allow them to be at the service first?" "No," she laughed. "Right now, I am unable to modify the reservation. Everyone has verified that this elevation is significant. I can't really postpone a funeral party or something like that." I said it again, raising my voice. "Jessica, my spouse is dead. The man who covered all of your college expenses, it was a long time ago." She brushed it off. "Look, any funeral is not as essential as my advancement. Every day, people pass away." Then she also hung up. As if to twist the knife even further, I stood in my kitchen, phone still in hand, completely astonished. My mother sent me a message on my phone. "Give up putting pressure on your sister. Some funeral is not as essential as her celebration. She put a lot of effort into getting this promotion." Bright and clear dawned on the day of Mark's funeral, a parody of the gloom I experienced within. The simplicity of the service was exquisite. People who had truly cared for Mark, including coworkers, friends, neighbors, and relatives, filled the little chapel. Mark had never been one for grandiose displays. At any rate, his family. I talked about Mark's compassion, generosity, and steadfast dedication to our kid throughout the eulogy. Robert gripped Ethan's hands while tears ran down his cheeks as he sat between Linda and Robert. Many individuals came up to me after the funeral to express their sympathies and inquire about my parents' absence. Mark's roommate from college remarked, "I was surprised not to see your folks. Are they sick?" They were already committed. I gave a stiff response, unwilling to go into further detail. After noticing my uneasiness, Linda skillfully changed the topic of conversation. I sat by myself in the living room that evening after everyone had left, surrounded by flower arrangements and condolence cards. Without Mark, the house felt incredibly empty. It hurt how loud the silence was. Jessica texted me, and my phone buzzed. I hope the funeral was a success. Mom shared pictures from my celebration. Became a senior account executive after being promoted. Not a single condolence. No recognition of what I had just experienced. It was merely a celebration of her achievement, complete with emojis for parties. Without answering, I switched off my phone and went upstairs to see how Ethan was doing. He was holding onto the teddy bear that Mark had given him for his most recent birthday while he slept soundly. The steady rhythm of his breathing soothed me as I crawled into bed next to him. I spent the following week navigating life in a daze. Every day, Linda and Robert stopped by to help me organize Mark's stuff, bring food, and take Ethan to the park. Not once did my parents call to see how I was doing or to inquire about their grandson. Nothing. Mark's attorney, Mr. Simmons, called me a week after the funeral. "It's time to talk about Mark's will, Miss S. Turner," he clarified. He prepared himself with great care. Would the reading be possible tomorrow afternoon? After agreeing, I called Robert and Linda to extend an invitation. Naturally, they were mentioned in the will, and Mark would have preferred that. At exactly 2 p.m. the following day, Mr. Simmons showed up at our house with a leather briefcase and a serious expression that lightened upon seeing Ethan. "Your father talked about you a lot," he said to my son, formally shaking his little hand. "He was quite pleased with you." We all settled in the living room. Me, Ethan, Linda, and Robert. Ready for what? I expected to be a straightforward reading market. I had discussed his wishes extensively during his illness, so there would be no surprises. But just as Mr. Simmons was about to begin, the doorbell rang. "Are you expecting anyone else?" Linda asked, looking confused. "No," I replied, equally puzzled as I went to answer the door. I nearly slammed it shut when I saw my parents and Jessica standing on the porch, all wearing expressions of exaggerated sympathy. "What are you doing here?" I asked bluntly. "We heard about the wall reading," my mother said, trying to look past me into the house. "Mark wasn't a stranger to us, you know. We have a right to be here." "All right," I repeated incredulously. "You couldn't be bothered to come to his funeral, but you have a right to be at his will. Reading." My father cleared his throat. "Now, Ella, there's no need to bring up old grievances. We're here to support you." "Support me?" I gave a sour laugh. "That's right." But before I could shut the door, my mother gently pushed past me, with my father and Jessica following close behind. "We're family," she said firmly, as if that explained everything. I stood there, stunned by their audacity as they made their way to the living room. Linda and Robert's faces darkened when they saw who had arrived. "What are they doing here?" Robert whispered. When I returned, "I have no idea," I replied, my hands shaking with anger. "But I'm not going to make a scene in front of Ethan." Mr. Simmons, ever the professional, merely raised an eyebrow before continuing. "Shall we proceed with the reading of the will?" My parents and Jessica sat on the couch opposite Linda and Robert, with Ethan beside me in an armchair. The tension in the room was suffocating. I, Mark Andrew Turner, being of sound mind, declare this to be my last will and testament. Mr. Simmons began reading from the formal document. Mark had left everything meticulously organized to his parents. He left $200,000, enough to ensure their comfortable retirement, and to thank them for their unwavering support throughout our marriage and his illness. "We never expected," Linda began, her voice breaking as Robert held her hand tightly. Then came the main provisions to me. He left our house, 2 apartments in the city center that I hadn't even known he owned, and $400,000 in liquid assets. The apartments generate significant rental income, Mr. Simmons explained. Mark purchased them as investments 3 years ago. I sat there stunned by the extent of Mark's planning. He'd ensured Ethan and I would be financially secure no matter what. As Mr. Simmons continued reading, I noticed my mother's expression change from feigned sympathy to undisguised interest. Jessica sat up straighter, suddenly paying attention. When the lawyer finished, my mother clapped her hands together. "Well, this is wonderful news, isn't it, Ella? You're quite well off now." The room fell silent. Linda and Robert stared at her in shock. My mother continued, oblivious to the tension with 2 apartments and all that money. "You can certainly help out family now. Jessica has been suffering with rent on her house, haven't you, dear?" Jessica nodded eagerly. "It's so expensive these days, and you have 2 apartments just sitting there. What I was hearing was unbelievable. My spouse wasn't even called in his grave, and they were already examining his valuables. You should give one of those flats to Jessica. My father chimed in as if it were the most sensible proposal in the world. What do you need two for, anyway? I rose up slowly, my hands squeezed into fists at my sides. Are you serious right now? You miss Mark's funeral for a party, ignore me and Ethan for a week, then show up uninvited to his will, reading to claim his possessions. Now, Ella, my father started, his tone dismissive. There's no reason to be selfish, you're alone now. But you have all this wealth, you should share it. Selfish. I said it again, raising my voice. I'm not alone myself. Mark left everything for his son's future, and I have Ethan. Every dollar will be used to ensure that Ethan receives the greatest education, the greatest opportunities, and the finest life possible now that his father is unable to support him. I saw my sister and dad gaze at each other, their eyes darting to Ethan with an expression that uncannily resembled bitterness. You're being absurd, my mother yelled. Not some kid who won't even attend college for years. But Jessica needs support now. Is your grandson that child? Robert spoke forward, his voice tense with rage. His father also passed away recently. Anger made my mother's cheeks flush. You have no right to dictate to me how I should care for my own grandchild. She yelled at Robert. You haven't been in this family as long as we have. Despite this, you have demonstrated a striking lack of interest in participating. Linda gave a chilly response. That's sufficient. My patience eventually gave out as I spoke strongly. Could you please take a moment to walk upstairs to your room, Ethan? Show Mr. Simmons your model airplanes if you can. The lawyer swiftly jumped up and grasped Ethan's hand, obviously pleased to be out of the family turmoil. Young dude, I'd love to view your collection. I stopped holding back and turned to my sister and dad as soon as they were out of earshot. How dare you enter my home and demand my husband's money only days after his burial, which you couldn't even bring yourself to attend? Mark has dedicated his life to supporting Ethan and myself. He spent 2 years fighting cancer. And what assistance did you provide during all that time? Not at all. For several hours, you wouldn't even keep an eye on Ethan. It's unfair. I interrupted my father as he started. No. When your roof fell following the storm 3 years ago, Mark had to spend thousands of dollars fixing it, which is unfair. We paid for Jessica's whole college tuition when you said you couldn't afford it, which is unfair. Well, let me be really clear about this. I'm not going to give you any of Mark's assets or money. Never, ever. Every dollar will be used to help Ethan and ensure his future. That was Mark's desire. That's what's going to occur. Anger twisted my mother's face. You are an unappreciative jerk. What specifically have you done for me after everything that we have done for you? Mom? Give an example of a selfless parenting deed. She couldn't think of a response, so she opened and closed her lips. I had that thought. Silently, I said, It's probably time for you all to go. Suddenly weary, I fell onto the couch as the door shut behind them. Did I do the right thing? Robert said in a soft yet forceful voice. Jessica is still my sister, and they are still my parents. Linda sat next to me and took my hand, saying, Biology doesn't make family. Family is made of love. Being there creates family. Family is being there when things are tough. I nodded, still feeling the pain of rejection that had accompanied me all my life, even though I knew she was correct. I discovered that my mother had tagged me in a social media post when I got down at my computer later that evening. After Linda and Robert had left and Ethan had gone to bed, I'm devastated that, despite having 2 flats in the heart of the city and lots of money, my oldest daughter has become so avaricious and self-centered since her husband's death that she won't help her poor sister. Material prosperity has transformed her. I gazed at the screen as friends and family who only heard the warped version of the narrative my mother provided them began to leave empathetic remarks. Don't allow LA get away with it. Family should support family. Jessica, poor Jessica, is always having trouble and LA has been given everything. A wave of rage overwhelmed me like I had never felt before, even for my mother attempting to publicly humiliate me into handing them. Mark's money was a new low. I inhaled deeply before I began typing. I would tell the public the complete, uncensored narrative of our family's problems if my mother decided to do so. I feel compelled to reply to my mother's decision to make our private family affairs public. Even though I have been silent about it for far too long, after a 2-year struggle with stomach cancer, my husband Mark was buried 3 days ago. His funeral was not attended by my sister or parents. Why? Because they believed that my sister's promotion celebration, which she had planned for the same day, was more significant. For those who are unaware, Mark has provided numerous financial assistance to my parents over the years, including covering my sister's full college tuition and significant house renovations. Despite this, they were always too busy to help me throughout his sickness, even if it was simply to watch our son for a few hours. They arrived for the reading of Mark's will yesterday without being invited. After finding out that he had left our kid and I with a stable income, they requested right away that I give my sister one of our rental homes since, quote, she needed it more than a child. As their 9-year-old grandchild, that boy recently lost his father. I don't say this to offend them, but I'm sick of being portrayed as the bad guy in a tale, when all I've ever done is try to be a nice wife, mother, daughter, and sister. As Mark intended, the funds will be utilized for our son's education and future. I hope this makes everything obvious. I included the screenshots I had saved, which included many texts in which they refused to assist throughout Mark's sickness, and the one in which my mother stated that Jessica's party was more important than Mark's burial. Before I pushed the post button, my finger lingered over it for a few seconds. The tone of the comments on my mother's first post radically shifted in a matter of minutes. Is this accurate, Karen? You went to a party instead of your son-in-law's funeral? I'm shocked that you would anticipate LA to donate assets intended for her son. It is shocking to see those text messages. How could you claim that a funeral is less significant than a party? Throughout the evening, messages and calls were received. Friends and family have offered support and expressed shock at my parents' actions. In the comments, my mother attempted to accuse me of lying, but the screenshots were self-evident. She eventually completely removed her initial post, but the harm to her reputation had already been done. I discovered dozens of missed calls from Jessica and my parents when I woke up the following morning. Without checking their voicemails, I blocked their numbers. I had no interest in hearing what they had to say. They made every effort to get in touch with me during the ensuing weeks. Emails requesting money while pleading for forgiveness. Messages via mutual friends, including unexpected visits to our home. Every time I remained steadfast in my resolve to remove them from our lives. They won't ever change, will they? One afternoon, while we were watching Ethan play in the backyard, I asked Linda. Seldom do people, she said. Not substantially, to be honest. In any case, it's peculiar. I always believed that I required their affection and approval. I've worked for it all my life, but now. You see your own value now. For me, she completed. Ethan deserves more than to go through that cycle again, as you can see. Life had returned to its usual routine 6 months following Mark's passing. Robert and Linda were constants in our life, assisting with Ethan's schoolwork and coming to Sunday dinners with us. After Mark left us, I took over the management of the rental homes, and I was pleasantly surprised by the job. The city center flats proved to be great investments, bringing in a consistent income to help offset the money. I saved for Ethan's schooling. I also put part of the money in shares of firms Mark had always believed in, watching with delight as the dividends flowed in. As for my parents and Jessica, I periodically got information through the family grapevine. They were having financial difficulties. It seems that my parents were whining about the expense of retirement and that Jessica had lost her job. Every time, the sender would clumsily imply that maybe I might assist them. I always gave the same response. I'm sorry to hear that they're struggling, but I have a duty to my son. I was referred to as unforgiving or chilly by some. Perhaps I was, but I knew I had made the correct decision when I saw Ethan, surrounded by people who genuinely loved him, getting stronger and happier every day. He asked me a question that surprised me one night as I was putting him to bed. Do you ever miss Grandpa David and Grandma Karen, Mom? I took a moment to think of an honest response without bothering him with mature issues. I wish we had a relationship because I miss it. Finally, I said, but not the one we had. He nodded, as if he understood better than a youngster of his age ought to. I'm happy that Grandpa Robert and Grandma Linda are here. I agree, friend. I agree. Some people would never comprehend my decision to distance myself from my birth family. They had never known the ongoing letdown, the enduring pattern of partiality, or the agonizing insight that some people are just not able to prioritize others. However, I got it. More significantly, I had ended the cycle. Ethan would be surrounded by people who loved him with deeds rather than just words, and he would grow up knowing his value. People who didn't see him as a tool, who didn't place restrictions on their support, and who showed up when it mattered. Story 3. My name is Michelle, and I grew up in what appeared to be a picture-perfect home with my twin sister Camilla. My mother was a blonde former model who never let everyone forget it, and my father was a dashing brunette with powerful features. However, Camilla and I didn't look anything like either of them when we were born, even though they were both attractive. Instead, we adopted our paternal grandfather's traits: large cheekbones, a heavy chin, a big nose, and black hair. There is nothing like my mother's exquisite looks, which she valued greatly. My mother would look at us with hardly concealed disappointment and mutter, "What a shame. If you girls had followed in my footsteps, you could have been so beautiful." These remarks turned into the background music during our early years. Every time my mother said these things, my sister Camilla would shut herself in the toilet and scream for hours. We had to be the ugly ones, but why? When I check on her, sheets are up through the door. One day, after my mother had said something particularly hurtful about my poor nose, I recall standing in front of the mirror. I spent a lot of time looking at my mirror. I don't appear all that terrifying, I told myself. I resemble a lot of regular individuals. My adolescence validated this. I had no trouble making friends, both lads and girls who didn't give a damn about my appearance. We had a wide range of friends. Jake's tanned skin had white spots from the bite of LIGO. Tim had acne that looked to be unresponsive to therapy, while Emma was overweight and unconcerned. We all got along well, going to movies, swapping music, and just hanging around like typical teenagers. "What's good about our group, Jake once told me. No one is attempting to pretend to be someone they're not. Camilla's experience was much different. While I was content with how I looked, her obsession with altering hers grew stronger. She was desperate to become part of the popular crowd, the school's dominant group of conventionally gorgeous students. She was incensed that they didn't want to interact with her. She would tear out magazine photos and declare, "I just need to fix my face. They'll see after that." Pictures of her idol, a well-known musician whose face was on every billboard in the city, were all over her room. The singer's eyes were large, her lips were full, and her nose was little. I allegedly lacked everything Camilla desired. "One day, I will resemble her exactly," Camilla would say. "Simply wait and see." Our paths took a significant turn when we were 18 and graduated from high school. Using the funds our parents had saved for our education, I decided to go to college. Camilla had other ideas. "I will not be attending college." At our graduation dinner, she made the announcement. My parents appeared in disbelief. "What are you discussing?" Dad inquired. She stated, her voice hardened with purpose. "I want to use my college fund for plastic surgery. First, I want a new nose." "Definitely not," my father answered right away. However, my mother's eyes took on an odd expression. She put her hand on Dad's arm and said, "Let's talk about this." I spent the following 4 years getting my business degree. Camilla was in and out of the offices of plastic surgeons. Her nose was smaller after her initial operation. She got her cheekbones shaved 6 months later. My twin had hardly changed by the time I received my honors degree. At a big marketing company, I pushed myself into developing my profession. Camilla progressively ascended the ladder as she continued to alter over the course of 9 years. She had 10 different surgeries, including a smaller nose, lowered cheekbones, larger eyes, plumped lips, and even a new hairline. In order to match our mother, she grew out her hair and colored it blonde. Isn't she beautiful? Every time I went to a professional beauty nail salon, my mom would get really excited. Dad had resisted the procedures at first, but he gave up after the first few. By the 6th operation, he was genuinely supporting her and assisting her in finding the top physicians. "Your sister pursues her goals because she is aware of them." Once he told me, as though her fixation on altering her appearance was some sort of noble resolve. I was doing really well at work in the interim. I was given my own office and crew when I was promoted to senior marketing director last year at the age of 26. I occasionally dated, but I was mostly preoccupied with my successful profession. Visits with family become more awkward. Camila would be adored by my mother, who would refer to her as my beautiful doll and seldom acknowledge me, save for the rare look of poorly veiled hatred at my face. Have you ever considered getting your nose done at the very least, Michelle? At a holiday meal, she inquired. The job of your sister's surgeon is outstanding, I said. Mom, I'm happy with my face. My father, who had previously protected me from my mother's criticism, suddenly joined in. Now Camilla looks so put together, he remarked, grinning at her and frowning at me as he looked between us. Expert. Michelle, it could boost your career. I tried to seem even as I said, my career's doing just fine. It was during these discussions that Camilla would grin. Camilla started calling me names I hadn't heard since middle school after her abrupt change. Bullies attempted but were unable to make me feel inferior. When I would show up for family get-togethers, she would say, "Here comes the horror show." I found out she had thrown away all of our childhood pictures on a scary movie night at the parents' place. Her natural face was completely removed as soon as I had my own place. I was only able to save a handful of photos, one from prom night and another from our 6th birthday, the last time we actually resembled identical twins. Camilla began posing for internet clothes retailers with her new look. She spent her meager income on clothing and makeup for her picture sessions while living with our parents for free. Have you seen my most recent campaign? Every time I visited, she would inquire while thrusting her phone in my face. 50,000 likes have already been made. Her Instagram consisted mostly of well-produced images with several effects applied. Unaware of the surgery that had produced her beauty, comments applauded it. I tried to be polite but kept my distance. I didn't want to participate in her comparisons because I had my own life and pals. The supper that made all the difference then arrived. At our parents' table, Camila clinked her glass and announced, "I have an announcement. I'm getting married." I sat there in disbelief while my folks cheered. "He's called Daniel," she added. "He comes from a good family and works as a financial advisor." Camila smirked at me before turning to face our parents. "You see, this is the reason she is still unmarried, and I am getting married. I have the ability to captivate any man with my face. Some people simply lack that ability." Refusing to fall for the ruse, I inhaled deeply. "Camila, congratulations. Together, I hope you'll be extremely happy." I heard a hostile knock on my apartment door 2 days after Camila declared her engagement. My mother and sister were standing there with identically determined looks when I opened it. Without waiting for an invitation, my mother brushed past me into my living room and said, "We need to talk about the wedding." Camila trailed behind, taking a seat on my couch and surveying my apartment with a clear lack of interest. She said, "Not bad for someone on your salary. How about the nuptials?" I crossed my arms and asked. When my mother was prepared to make a request, she flashed her tight smile. "Your sister must have the ideal wedding. She has a great opportunity to truly succeed. Make something of her," I said again. "She's a model already." Camila gave an eye roll. "Please." "Those jobs pay very little. Daniel, however, is wealthy. Actual cash. What does it mean for me then?" Even though I already knew where this was going, I inquired. My mother stated plainly that we need assistance with the costs. "I've already spent a lot of money on Camila's upgrades with your father." "Her 10 plastic procedures, you mean?" Camila corrected me after I clarified investing. "They also paid off. Take a look at my future spouse. You want your wedding to be paid for by me?" I said. My mom gave a nod. "You ought to assist your sister. This could be her only opportunity." I gave a head shake. "I'll give it some thought." Camila wasn't satisfied with it. For the next week, she came to my flat every day. I occasionally waited to get home from work by waiting in the hallway outside my door. "I won't leave unless you give your consent. I'll sleep right here if I have to," she would add. I eventually caved up after being harassed for 5 days. "All right. I'll assist with the wedding planning. What is the amount that you require?" "My half should be covered by $80,000, Camila replied nonchalantly, as though she hadn't just demanded a sizable portion of my funds. I almost choked. $80,000? Are you crazy? The other half is being paid by Daniel, she responded defensively. His parents are also making a contribution. I consented even though I knew I would regret it. But I wasn't foolish enough to give Camila money. I informed her that I would pay the suppliers directly. Give me their details. Despite her pout, she nodded. I also arranged with the venue, caterer, photographer, florist, and DJ throughout the course of the following several days. I always felt a little queasy when I placed a deposit or signed a contract, but this will finally get my family off my back, I convinced myself. When will Daniel be here to meet me? I questioned Camila. She became tense one day as we were going over floral arrangements. He is now quite busy. Banking for investments. You are aware. He will be there for the wedding. Though I didn't press it, I thought that was strange. I assumed she was ashamed to present her ideal fiancé to her sister from the horror show. I attempted to contact Camila to go over some last-minute arrangements 2 months before to the wedding. I made the decision to visit our parents' house, where she was still residing, after she failed to respond after many tries. I entered with my old key at roughly 7 o'clock in the evening. I could sense a problem as soon as I entered. I could hear the clink of glasses and the whisper of talk in the candlelit dining area. I approached the noise and stopped at our formal dining room's doorway. My folks were seated there. Daniel's parents must have been an elderly couple, and Camila, a dashing man I thought was Daniel. They were all dressed up, having champagne toasts and smiling. An engagement celebration. They grew silent when they saw me standing there without an invitation. Halfway to my father's mouth, the glass stopped. My mom's grin flickered on and off. Daniel's parents appeared perplexed. It was Camila who recovered first. She sprung from her seat and came running to me. "Come, Sola," she cried out. "At last you succeeded! These dishes refuse to wash themselves, and the kitchen is a complete disaster." She took hold of my arm and pushed me in the direction of the kitchen. I couldn't help but be astonished. "What are you doing when we were in the kitchen?" I hissed. "Play along," she said fiercely in a whisper. "These folks are significant. Please do not spoil this for me." After pushing me farther into the kitchen, she quickly made her way back to the dining area. I stood at the sink in a fog, trying to take in the situation. Then I heard Camila's voice, which was purposefully raised over the level required. From the dining room carrying, I apologize for it. We recruited Consuela, a Mexican immigrant, to assist with household chores. It's a bad thing. She works hard, but hardly speaks English. I give her double the normal fee because I think it's important to aid others who are less fortunate. My blood ran cold. To improve my hearing, I drew nearer to the door. "Camila, that's really kind of you." Presumably the voice of a lady, warmly, Daniel's mother stated. Young people rarely consider others who are less privileged. We brought her up correctly. With pride, my mother added her voice. What I was hearing was unbelievable. I was posing as their maid for my own family. Unable to comprehend the treachery, I stood still. My initial reaction was to discreetly depart and handle this matter at a later time, away from unfamiliar people. I kept my head down and tried to go through the dining room toward the front door. "Consuela?" As I passed, Camila gave a sharp cry. "Today, not tomorrow, is the time to do the dishes." Avoid aimlessly wandering about the home. Something broke inside of me. Everyone jumped as I strode to the table and smashed my hand down so forcefully that the dishes shook. "Consuela is not my name." My voice remained firm as I spoke, even though I was furious. "I am Camila's twin sister, Michelle." Daniel's lovely face was slack with amazement as I turned to face him. "Look closely at me. This is the true appearance of your fiancé. You were accustomed to it previously." Her face was totally altered by 10 cosmetic surgery procedures. There was complete quiet. A hand was placed against Daniel's mother's chest. His father's jaw dropped. It was as though my parents intended to vanish. I looked at Camila, whose flawless makeup had rendered her face white. I spat. "For once in your life, clean up your own mess." Then I left, trembling with rage as I made my way home. My phone was inundated with calls and texts as soon as I entered my flat. "Mom, how could you humiliate us in that way? My dad. This time, you've gone too far." And Camila, a litany of curse words. I will not do that again. Until Camila phoned for the 20th time, I chose to ignore them all. I said, interrupting her outburst with a query. Did I ever receive an invitation to your wedding? A pause occurred. So why would I bring a lunatic like you to my life's most significant event? You would destroy every picture. I only needed to know that. After saying that, I hung up. I had contacted the venue's caterer, photographer, florist, and DJ within 1 hour. Everything is being canceled. The sellers were sympathetic. They reimbursed my money less a modest cancellation charge, stating that these things happen. I poured myself a big glass of wine, shut off my phone, and raised a glass to the $75,000. I had just saved. The following morning, I heard someone beating on the door of my flat. My father, mother, and sister were standing in the hallway when I looked around. Anger was twisted on their faces. "Michelle, open this door now." Against my better judgment, my mother yelled. I opened the door for them. Like a cyclone, they barged into my living room. "How on earth did you accomplish that?" Camila yelled and rushed directly at me. The location confirmed the cancellation over the phone. The caterer as well. I crossed my arms and remarked, "Everything's gone good. Why should I pay for an invitation that you weren't going to send anyhow?" "You nasty, self-centered bastard," Camilla spit. "You're jealous because you're still a troll and I've changed for the better." My dad came forward. "This is unacceptable conduct, Michelle. You must resolve this and give those vendors a call back right now." I gave him a serious glance and noticed a stranger. The man who used to tell me stories before bed was suddenly unable to look at me without squirming. "No," I answered plainly. "No, what do you mean?" My mom insisted. "No, I'm not going to call anyone. Nothing is being paid for by me. The funds have returned to their rightful place in my account." My mother responded in a disgusted tone, "You're ruining Camilla's life because you're jealous." "She has always made you jealous." My laughter was real. "What is the object of jealousy?" Her relationships were superficial and she was insecure. Her face, which no longer even resembles her. "At least I have a lovely face," Camilla gave a hiss. "Not like yours. Leave now." Suddenly tired of all of them, I remarked, "Now leave my apartment." As I led them to the door, my mother said, "You'll regret this. That face will make you lonely in the end." "I'd rather be alone than surrounded by people like you," I said, shutting the door. Camilla wasn't finished with me yet, even though I assumed that would be the end of it. She began posting lengthy, in-depth tirades on social media that evening, claiming that I had always envied her fortune and attractiveness and that her sister had destroyed her wedding out of spite. How I attempted to ruin her joy. On her behalf, her supporters ultimately sent outraged and supportive comments. That game might be played by two people. I had accounts on social media, but I seldom ever utilized them. I penned an easy post. "It's interesting that my twin sister says I envy her attractiveness." Here are some photos from her high school graduation for people who are interested in what natural looks like. Prior to her 10 cosmetic surgery procedures, I've included one of the few pictures I had of Camila and myself when we were 18, looking exactly alike with our big features and black hair. The reaction was instantaneous. Camila's supporters and friends were taken aback. Comments were flooding in. "Hold on. Are you twins? Her having a sibling was unknown to me. Does she actually look like that now?" Since Camila had never revealed having a twin, several of her closest friends appeared to be deeply offended. Others were shocked to hear how extensive her operations were, since she had always downplayed them as minor procedures. Camila claimed that the message was placed without her consent and attempted to get it taken down, but the harm had already been done. Screenshots were shared. Individuals conversed. Her meticulously crafted persona started to crumble. My assistant informed me that someone was waiting to see me the following day while I was at work attempting to concentrate on the presentation. To my amazement, Camilla's fiancé, Danielle, was standing clumsily at the doorway of my office. "Can we have a conversation?" he inquired. I motioned Danielle to have a seat. He was attractive in that traditional sense. Tall, with well-groomed hair and flawless teeth. It's exactly the kind Camilla should catch. "How may I help you?" I asked in a businesslike manner. He fumbled with his timepiece. "I was interested in your perspective. I need to know what's going on after the wedding was called off and what transpired at supper." I looked at him for a while. "Have you been sent here by Camilla?" "No," he said rapidly. "She is unaware of my presence." If she discovered that at least appeared sincere, she would be incensed. "What are you trying to find out?" I inquired. All of his words. "Let's start with the reason your family made you the maid." With a sigh, I told him a condensed account of our early years, spent with our mother who was fixated on appearances. The surgeries, Camilla's obsession with altering her appearance, our growing distance from one another, and ultimately the disastrous wedding. In actuality, she underwent 10 procedures. His expression was surprised as he asked. Instead of attending college, I at least verified that she began at the age of 18. Her new face was purchased with our parents' retirement funds. Daniel combed his hair with his hand. She informed me that during her time in college, she had minor work done, such as a nose job. I laughed without a sense of humor. "Have you already seen pictures of her?" "No," he said. "Years ago," she claimed. "They were all destroyed in a home fire." "No fire was present. She tossed them all away," I replied. "She doesn't want her true appearance to be known." Daniel was silent for a while. Finally, he added, "You look fine, you know." "Typical?" "Better than usual. Naturally. I can glimpse Camilla's potential appearance without all the effort the more I gaze at you." I was astonished by the comment and answered, "Thanks, I guess. I've been questioning myself." Even before that supper, he confessed, "Camilla always seemed strange, like if she were acting out a part." After witnessing how she handled you and how readily your whole family lied, "I don't believe I can wed her. Between you and her, that is." I spoke slowly. "I didn't say anything to disparage your fiancé, did I?" "No, you didn't," he concurred. "You're quite different from what she said." "What was it she described?" "A resentful, envious lady who has been attempting to undermine her since she was a young child. Someone who can't bear to watch other people happy because she is so consumed with jealousy." I gave a head shake. "That sounds less related to me and more like her projection." Daniel got to his feet. "I appreciate your candor with me. I'm going to have some tough talks. I wish you luck." I meant what I said. The news surfaced on Camilla's social media 2 days later. The wedding was off. Daniel had canceled, stating that they couldn't agree. Naturally, Camilla placed the blame on me. The really horror started at that point. Tormenting me seemed to be Camilla's full-time job. In the mornings, she would wait outside the building where I lived. She would accompany me to work. She sent a ton of messages to my phone, and from fictitious accounts she made. "My life was wrecked by you. 3 a.m., she texted. "Yours will be ruined by me." She even made a direct contact to my supervisor, requesting that he dismiss me for acting unethically and causing emotional harm to a family member. When she appeared at client meetings, she caused a spectacle that humiliated me and made it difficult for me to keep up my professional image. She was sitting in my hallway one evening when I got home. Her face was smeared with mascara. "Is Daniel already seeing someone else?" Her voice was empty as she said. "An unremarkable accountant from his workplace. There was nothing unique about her." I meant it when I said I was sorry. I was still pained to see her in anguish in spite of everything. "No, you're not." The vulnerability vanished as she snapped. "You had us planned." "It was your desire for me to lose everything." "Camilla, that isn't accurate. All I wanted was to be given basic respect." She responded, "You'll pay for this," and stood up. "I haven't finished with you." After she eventually went, I took a seat and dialed my company's corporate attorney, who dealt with issues involving harassment. He assisted me in writing a stop and desist letter once I gave him the rundown. It made it quite obvious that I would take Camilla to court if she persisted in her harassment. She must have been alarmed by the letter because the calls and messages abruptly ceased. For the first time in weeks, the stalking stopped. I was able to breathe once again. I was thinking about my mother that night as I sat in my peaceful apartment. In many respects, she had been doing this since she was very little. The seeds of insecurity had been sown in both of us by her. Although I had been able to go past them, Camilla had been totally engulfed by them. "You look awful." Innumerable times, my mother had told us both. For Camilla, they were simply words to me. They becoming her reality. I saw a picture of Daniel and his new girlfriend while browsing social media. As Camilla had stated, she had an entirely normal appearance. Her face was round, she wore spectacles, and her grin was sincere. Together, they appeared content. After shutting off my laptop, I turned to face the mirror. My grandfather's heritage was etched on my face as I stared back at myself with the same powerful features that had always been there. I saw nothing to feel guilty about. I received a message on my phone from Mark, who I had been seeing for a few weeks. "Tomorrow's meal is still planned," he had written. "Yes," I said with a smile. Normal was looking fairly nice, and life was returning to normal.